أهنئ كافة المنظمين لهذا الحدث وأشكر فرصة تواجدي في المملكة العربية السعودية وفي هذه المدينة البديعة جدة وفي تجددها المستمر. And now I'll turn directly into English. I have like 20 minutes to share with you some updates on the sector and the developments in the water as a source of life and as a critical part of sustainable development and as part of the climate adaptation agenda. I have a few updates, and I've been following the great presentations from the very beginning of the day, so I'll skip some of the slides based on what I see that could be repetitive. But I'd like to leave you with a few messages that all of what you have been discussing will be either facilitated or stuck because of finance. And in this big change that we're after, to develop the availability and access to water, we need finance, we need technology and innovation, which is very much visible outside in the impressive exhibition, and it needs incentive structure based on governance. And I'm happy that the discussion so far and the rich agenda have been covering these areas in a very eloquent way. These are basically the intentions of the presentation, discussing the global landscape of water. SDG 6, as being presented earlier, and the Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 goals, water is number 6. And that shouldn't really be put in isolation because SDG 7 is about energy and SDG 2 about food. And here there's a nexus between water, food, and energy. And again, when I was in the exhibit, I found this good interlinkages between agriculture, food systems, water, and energy. Then there are some areas of importance related to adaptation. And again, the discussions, including from DC, mentioned areas related to the pressure on the water availability and the impact of climate and climate change. But again, all of these matters are going to be confronting the cost of water infrastructure. And wherever we're discussing matters related to development, rural development, urban development, matters related to infrastructure finance is the bulk of any investment. Even if we are focusing on human capital investment in education and health, you will find the infrastructure-related investment are very much the bulk of the investments. Of what we have, you go around the world, you feel that we have lots of water, but only less than 0.5% of Earth's water is usable and accessible. And we're seeing that the per capita water resources have been steadily decreasing, not just because of the population growth, but basically because of various demands, including some areas of technology. When we are focusing on AI transformation, on data systems, you will find that there are demands for water and water systems. Then, as I mentioned earlier, there is that nexus. You cannot really deal with water alone. You need really to put the interlinkages approach, linking water to food, to energy system. And here there is that emphasis earlier, including with the regulators mentioned, that the fragmented system had been very much harming the way that the policy and its impact is achieved because we have been working in a kind of a fragmented system. Sometimes you develop energy without adequate acknowledgement of the needs of water. Sometimes we have ambitious agriculture and food programs without realizing the two constraints. But it's very much important and timely when you are discussing, and there are some updates of this figure, that when it comes to a level of water stress, North Africa and Western Asia, this exactly the Arab countries of this region are among those who have been suffering the most because of the scarcity of water and the higher demand, and there are issues here of tensions related to the level of water stress compared to other regions. Yes, there is a stress worldwide, and measured at 18 percentage points, but here when you go to the North Africa and Western Asia, or basically Middle East and North Africa, you'll see the stress even more. And even worse, when it comes to the efficiency of the use of water, here this region is not known to be among the highest, with few exceptions. You can talk about some countries that are doing better, and we've seen here that when it comes to wastewater that receives treatment in 1%, you see countries of OECD, advanced economies, but you can see here some good bright spots, including in the GCC countries that are taking matters related to treatment of water more seriously than others. The targets that were set to be achieved in 2030 will remain with us when it comes to international water resource management implementation, but this gap, if we're doing the right thing, the global target will be met, but not in 2030, it will be met in 2049 or 2050. This has some generous assumptions that finance will be available, incentives will be there, and the technological transformation will be on our side. But our region, again, is being affected, and here I'm repeating the matter from a different perspective for those countries that have been exposed to challenges facing achieving SDG 6 or the global goal when it comes to water. And this is just a quick reminder of what the SDG 6 covers, from universal access to safe and affordable drinking water to areas related to sanitation and the implementation of integrated water resource management, which again mentioned here. This slide is very important because it tells us when it comes to water, we are in the red. And when we are in that red, that it tells us that major challenges remain. This is based on the update from the SDSN, which is basically the database that provides updates to the Sustainable Development Goals by groups of countries. And if you are interested, you can check the performance of your country by goal and by performance measure. But here it tells us that when it comes to clean water and sanitation, reds, and this is not an eye test, but if you can see more reds, you are, or the red color, you are seeing, unfortunately, the right color. This means that we have major challenges, and when it comes to progress, that we are either stagnating, as we have seen it in few countries, especially in low-income countries, in low-middle-income countries, or we are improving slightly in countries of emerging markets or some advanced economies. And again, this is another way of sharing with you the same part of information, and our colleague from the World Bank used almost the same figure to tell you about the state of the SDGs. I'm saying, yes, you can take water from any perspective. That was the perspective of the SDGs. But some people like to take it from the adaptation agenda to climate change. And in the Sharm el-Sheikh conference on COP 3 years ago, it had put for the first time a spelled out kind of a program of action that covers food system, health, human settlement, coastal ocean systems, infrastructure systems as areas of prioritization for adaptation finance. And for the first time again, it highlighted the importance of water. So simply put, water for adaptation is exactly like energy when it comes to mitigation, when it comes to climate change. But you need ecosystems, finance, and technology to achieve all of that. This is just what I mentioned in words. What's available then when it comes to finance? For climate at large, it's almost $2 trillion, but what goes to adaptation, including what goes to water and systems, its management, is less than 5%. It's less than 4%. And the landscape of climate finance, I encourage you to have a look deeper in this. I'm leaving the slides for your own reference after that. But again, the areas related to adaptation requires a lot of attention, And of course, the meetings in Brazil a couple of weeks ago put that as an area of prioritization. And there have been some interesting pledges in the kind of investment that we need for wastewater treatment, water storage, desalination, leakage reduction, drinking water and distribution infrastructure and networks, and nature-based water management. There were some good promises, including in public-private partnership. What we have seen as veterans of many of the summits, it's all about implementing these pledges and see them materialized. This is a more focused study on needs of the least developed countries. Their needs could really be supported because what they need of total cost for all of the utilities, water, sanitation, hygiene, waste management, is around $7 to $9 billion. But you see that water and sanitation alone are responsible for almost 40% of the need. And again, even if you try, as some institutions claim that they are paying more attention to lower income countries or the least developed countries, again, even in these particular cases, they don't really get what they need of funding. So the summary here on the funding, when it comes to achieving the SDG targets related to water and sanitation, we are roughly in need of around $130 billion per annum for water and around $141 billion for sanitation. The experts in the room, they know very well that the cost of sanitation is much higher for technical reasons that you are aware of, especially now when we are trying to extend the service to remote areas. And despite the large spending gaps, here there is another area that execution rate is not really as you may expect, and the annual budget execution rate is about 72%. And this has something to do with areas related to efficiency and matters related to governance. These are basically a kind of global averages. If your country is doing better, congratulations, but this is basically the kind of harm that we are facing, that even if there is some sort of good allocation from the budget, there is a challenge when it comes to governance. And that encourages the following, that we need really to improve governance and regulatory instruments, from credit rating to water resilience, to raising the productivity of public spending. There are areas related to sovereign risk pools for drought and floods. So here, basically, we are trying to use some of the sophisticated management, monitoring, and evaluation techniques that have been utilized in different areas in order to do the same for water. But what we like to see here is improvements in the sources of finance. And I'd like to leave you very quickly with a couple of areas here for your consideration. For the countries, I'm not talking here about the GCC countries or Saudi Arabia, because, alhamdulillah, they have sources of funding from their own resources and from sovereign wealth funds, and their capacity to invest in infrastructure is less dependent on external sources. But I'm talking about the average developing economy or the average emerging market. And here we have a report from the OECD and the African Union. When it comes to investment on infrastructure, including infrastructure related to water and energy, 48% of the finance is coming from external sources. 41% is coming from budget, and only 11% is coming from the private sector. So these are the three sources of finance. And this is a kind of a snapshot to what we have today. But because of matters that we are aware of today, that the sources of finance when it comes to outside funding is facing challenges because of the decline of ODA. That started last year, a drop of 7% in 2024. This year, it is expected that ODA, or official development finance, to decline by 15 to 20%. So this is one source of funding. Budgets of the state are subject to constraints. Debt service, external debt service of many countries is exceeding today 7 times what they spend on infrastructure. So this is another source of funding from budgets, but because of what they spend on debt service, prioritized over what they spend on infrastructure and utilities, including water. Then you are left with the private sector, which still suffers from areas related to constraints when it comes to business environment, but we have as well issues related to bad perception. So when you want to bridge the water spending gap, you need to work on the three fronts. You need to mobilize funding as much as we can, and I know it's difficult because the day, actually either today or yesterday, the World Bank released the update on the FDI, and it's telling us that the foreign direct investment to all areas of work, including work related to infrastructure, has declined. Compared to the year 2008, the FDI today had declined by like 2%. The same ratio being used, FDI to GDP. So countries here, you have one of two options. You can blame the world for what we have, and it's not fair, and the FDI is declining, or debt is taking too much, and all of that. Or we can really have serious reforms that can really mobilize domestic resources, local resources, and encourage businesses to and incentivize businesses, including FDI, to participate. And that leaves me with the concluding remarks. Again, any area of major change would require technology innovation, would require incentives within adequate governance structure, and definitely would require finance. And that's why I started with finance, optimize the remaining official development assistance, prioritize budget spending, because we cannot survive without water in this particular discussion that we have. But definitely we can really do a better job than just attracting less globally, or actually in the areas related to infrastructure, that small share of private sector participation because of the reluctance of using better public-private partnerships. And I'm happy that the regulators and the leaders who spoke from the very beginning highlighted, and of course the chair of the Authority of Water in Saudi Arabia highlighted the importance of the private sector. But again, we need to see more of what we have seen outside, but to be more replicated, to be put more at scale. We have seen many good projects that have been already in existence with a great deal of achievement, but many of these projects need really to have the support of government and the regulators, and more support from the third countries than the one that they have been developing these projects at, in order to get them at scale. It's not just about having a nice project in one particular sector in a good area of work, but basically how to scale that up. So technology and innovation, but that needs to be scaled up. And then in this tough world with the kind of trade war that we see, the tensions between the incumbent powers like the US and Europe and the emerging powers like China and India when it comes to trade, investment, and technology, there is a good room for more localization, that you need really to mobilize your resources better, but there is a good role as well for regionalization. And that's why I'm very much happy to see all of these discussions today, as we have seen it in the session before this, when the regulators and the policymakers from the GCC had been sharing knowledge, technical assistance, empowering each others, perhaps inspired as well by some of the good examples. And I would say definitely one of the better examples of regional cooperation is existing today in the ASEAN countries that have countries like Singapore, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, and others collaborating with each other to do a better job. Now I have a few seconds and to conclude. The governance and integration that we need really to have. Great that all of the sessions mentioned that the fragmented approach didn't help, so they are integrating better. Governance needs really to be based on better data systems, better accountability, more effective monitoring and evaluation, and better feedback. And we need really to have more investments in the areas related to climate and development finance, because that suffers still. If you have a different Ministry of Climate and Environment and a different Ministry for Infrastructure, and they are not sharing information together, there could be really subject to unnecessary waste of funding, because you may take an action on water based on climate adaptation. Your colleague could be doing the same from a perspective of development, and without coordination, there would be some tough challenges that could be mitigated. If you are interested in this topic, and I only have 7 seconds to tell you that there is a full book published last week. I edited it. It has 38 authors in 18 chapters just talking about that. And it's open access, so it is not marketing for the book. You can just Google the name or have whatever browser, and you will find this book is available to you. Having said that, I'm very grateful to you all for being here, and best wishes for continued success in this important conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mohieldin, and we will certainly benefit from your book, inshallah. As we move forward, our next and final session of the day will delve into the importance of transparency, standards, and incentives in fostering impactful regulation. The moderator of this session will be Richard Rose, Senior Managing Director, NERA Economic Consulting, and the speaker will be Kristen Williams, Chief Administration Officer and EVP at DC Water. It's a fireside chat, regulation for impact, transparency, standards, and incentives.